What part of your life is Jesus not the Lord of? And whatever part he's not the Lord of, that's where you got to work on, because Jesus is supposed to be the Lord of every part of your life. And there's this misconception in the modern American evangelical church that politics is something where maybe Jesus isn't the Lord of that. And maybe we don't talk about that because Johnson Amendment, we don't want to lose our 501c3. Show me scripturally. Right? The Bible talks more about government than it does about heaven.
Hey there, welcome to Renew His World. I'm your host, Carmen Lindsay. Thank you so much for joining us. If you've ever felt like there's got to be more to my Christian experience, more significance, more joy, more meaning, more hope, you're absolutely right. This show and all of our content is about helping you discover your true identity in Christ Jesus and God's ultimate purpose for you on the planet. And when you see it, when you recognize it, you're going to absolutely love it and love life like you never thought possible. Each week, we're going to sit down with pastors and authors and guest speakers to learn how every believer can rise up with clarity and with courage to bring renewal, not just in our hearts and in our minds, but in our cities, even our nations. We can win this thing, and every episode is designed to show you how. So welcome again to Renew His World. Let's dive in. Alex, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm super excited. Everybody, this project is like, I found myself on a quest asking, how do we save America, right? How do we, biblically, how do we do it? I know the answer isn't politics. It's got to be something bigger than that. How do we do it? And so one of the things that became very clear is, it sounds a little dark, but you have to understand the enemy. Like that seemed very clear from scripture. It says, don't be ignorant of his devices. Resist the enemy. When I began to say we need to attack this, we need to have this understanding, everybody was like, you got to have Alex Newman. You got to have Alex. Everyone was like, you got to have Alex Newman. So
I'm honored. Thank you.
You're the enemy expert. I don't know if your children, your wife knows this, but you are the expert on the enemy. I read your book, Deep State. But first, I would love just to kind of step back. How did you become what you're doing now? Maybe give us a little background, how you grew up, where you grew up.
Sure. Well, thank you. And it's an honor to be here. Really appreciate what you're doing. It's a very sorely needed project. So I'm really glad you're working on it, and I'm humbled to be a part of it. So my background is unique and interesting. When I tell the story of how I got into journalism, people ask me that a lot. And I start off by saying, well, it seemed like an accident. I wasn't good at anything. I had gotten kicked out of high school. I was a big mess. No way. And the only thing I knew I could do was write, because a fifth grade teacher had told me that. So it just stuck with me. So that's how I ended up in journalism.
What'd you get up? Could we say it? Didn't you go offline? What'd you get kicked out of school for? You don't want to say.
It was cumulative.
Okay.
All kinds of I didn't know the Lord growing up, so I was.
What was your home life growing up? If you don't,
I had wonderful parents. We grew up as what my dad used to call CEO Catholics. Christmas and Easter only, we would go to church.
Yeah.
We never really took it too seriously. I was an altar boy in a movie one time. True story.
Wow. Okay.
But that was kind of my background. And we grew up all over the world, mostly Latin America in the early years. I spent 7 years in Mexico, 4 in Brazil. Then we moved to Europe. Then I moved to Africa and back to Europe.
Wow.
So I've been out of the country most of my life and running from the Lord the first half of my life. And getting into college, like I said, I went into journalism by default because I wasn't especially good at math or science or anything productive. I couldn't do engineering because that required a different kind of brain. So clearly divine providence. The Lord led me even before I knew him. He was leading me in the direction that he wanted me to go. But I got into journalism and then came to know the Lord in college as I was studying this very issue, right? Wow, there's a lot of evil people with evil plans to steal our freedom and destroy our country. And
what were you? So was it a particular class, like your politics?
Well, I'll tell you what, my university was filled with Marxists who were determined that all their students would follow in their footsteps. So interestingly, that had the exact opposite effect on me. The more they tried to brainwash me, the more I ran from that. And it ended up making me pretty conservative. And then coming to know the Lord, as I was looking into this plot to create a one world government, I had started studying the monetary system, the Federal Reserve, what a gigantic fraud that is. I don't know if we'll have time to get into that. But as I started researching this stuff, it just became obvious that, first of all, we're dealing with evil. I mean, these aren't just people with bad ideas or stupid people. They're brilliant.
Right,
And they know full well, many of them, what the effect of these policies that they pursue are going to be. So I came to the conclusion that we were dealing with evil. And one day the Holy Spirit just showed me, I think in a miraculous way, that the Bible is true. It was clear as day, obvious as can be, the Bible is true. And having not read the Bible, that was, I don't know what that means exactly.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I called my godmother, who had been debating with me and praying for me. I was like, you were right, the Bible's true. And that kind of changed everything. And started recognizing that journalism wasn't just to keep people informed. It was to honor the Lord, to expose the unfruitful works of darkness, as Paul tells us in Ephesians 5:11. And so that became my calling. And I liked to focus on things that were important, that were not being covered extensively. And so early on, I got into education. Started focusing on what they were doing. That was during the Common Core days. I don't know if you remember that, but right around the time when you were hearing whispers about
the new math.
Right. They were going to do a national curriculum, national standards. Like, really? That doesn't sound right. And then the United Nations. So my first big international assignment after I got out of college was 2009. I went to Copenhagen for the UN Climate Summit. And so that's how I kind of started dealing with all these different areas. And one of the common themes is that, so much of this is diabolical, so much of it is evil. And unfortunately, I don't think God's people have been properly instructed on, first of all, how important these things are, and second of all, the truth about so many of these matters.
Yeah. So you really are the expert on the enemy. I mean, that brought you to the Lord. I mean, that's just
ironically, yes.
Okay. I guess when we talk about the deep state, this diabolical nature, there tends to just be like you're a conspiracy theorist and you're kind of written off. I'm just wondering if we're going to go there right off the bat, but we might as well. The Illuminati. Is it just are there music producers in LA that are like, this is going to sell some records and it's just sort of this silly, hokey thing? Or is there some substance to it? Like what's historically, what are your thoughts on that?
There's several things to say about that, starting with the Holly weirdos and the music industry people who like to flash that stuff. I don't think most of them are truly in the Illuminati. I think a lot of them think it's cool, like, oh, we have secret power that you don't know about. We know secrets that you don't know about. And so I think for a lot of them, it's a marketing gimmick. But I do think some of them at the higher levels, and maybe Jay-Z, I don't know him personally, but he strikes me as the kind of guy who may be part of something that he doesn't quite understand. And I think at some point, some of these guys have gone through certain rituals. And so let's go back to the historical Illuminati first. Yes, there was an organization called the Illuminati. From what we know from historical records, it was founded right around the time that the United States was founded as an independent country. So it was started by a guy in Bavaria called Adam Weishaupt. He had been a professor of canon law. He had been involved in various nefarious things. And we know some about, by nature, secret societies are very difficult to track. They're very difficult to follow because by definition, they're secret societies. So the whole point is to not allow the public to know what they're doing. But we do know quite a bit about the historical organization called the Illuminati from a number of different sources. I would say the most important one was Proofs of a Conspiracy, written ironically by a very high-level Scottish Freemason named John Robison. And in this book, he talks about how he had gone through the Masonic lodges of Europe, Paris and Germany, all the way into Russia, and found out that there was a secret society within the secret society that was working to, as he put it, abolish all the governments and religions of Europe and to overthrow the whole system and create a one world brotherhood, right? Is I guess the most charitable interpretation you could have. And so, in essence, destroy private property, destroy true religion, destroy the family, and destroy the nation.
It's a nice brotherly love there. That was their main tenet. The main tenets of the Illuminati then was to destroy all those Christianity,
and to bring about at least what they portrayed as like a one world utopia, where man would no longer be divided by nation or by tribe or by tongue. And of course, we got to go back to the Bible here. It was God's idea actually to divide mankind into nations. It was God's idea to establish the family as the organizing unit of society. So it was God's idea to establish private property when he said, "Thou shalt not steal." And so the Illuminists, led by Adam Weishaupt, and they were corresponding corresponding with each other, they would use secret names like Spartacus and old Roman names. I think there was a real nostalgia for the old pagan Roman Empire, right, where sexuality was understood radically differently, orgies were commonplace. There was this sense among the Illuminists that Christianity was oppressive, that it was holding back human development, and that it needed to be destroyed. And so they started infiltrating the Masonic lodges of Europe. And according to John Robison, their first huge success was actually the French Revolution. So they kick off the French Revolution, and this is all dealt with extensively in the book Proofs of a Conspiracy. And what was the fruit of the French Revolution? Right? The Bible tells us, by their fruit ye shall know them. What was the fruit? Massive bloodshed, ruthless persecution of Christians, destruction of civilization, mass murder writ large, torture.
Rivers of blood. When I read literally from the guillotines, like there's
beheading right and left, right? And ironically, some of the revolutionists ended up beheaded too.
They would have stakes with like people's heads on them. I mean, it's like heads are literally rolling everywhere. I was blown away when I read about the French Revolution.
It was their big success, right? They were overthrowing the government. They were overthrowing, and to give you a sense of how much these people hated God, like they couldn't even tolerate a 7-day work or a 7-day week anymore. It had to be a 10-day week because 7 days, of course, comes out of the book of Genesis. And God created the world in 6, rested on the 7th. We're going to abolish all those vestiges of Christianity. We're going to change the dating system, everything. We're going to put a prostitute in Notre Dame Cathedral. You can worship her as the goddess of reason. So it was really a repaganization, a destruction of the old, and then build back better, to use some modern terminology.
Even what they would call each other, they didn't want to call each other like sir or have the distinctions of any authority. We're all sort of equal, the same. It seems like anything that was Christian related, like get rid of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Behead the priests, destroy the churches, or repurpose them to become temples for worshiping, for example, the goddess of reason. They talked a lot about reason as if these things were reasonable. So really, really ruthless and really, really vicious.
Hatred of Christianity, like this.
That was the defining trait.
Yes.
Eventually, the other European governments started getting wind of what was happening and started trying to suppress this operation. And so a lot of it went even further underground. And again, by nature, secret societies are very difficult to track because they're secret. So we don't know exactly who went where, what happened. But we do know that in less than a century, a lot of these ideas resurfaced again in the form of what we call Marxism today. The ideas of Karl Marx, outlined in a series of books, Das Kapital, the 10 Planks of the Communist Manifesto. And what a lot of people don't realize is there was a secret society behind Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels called the League of the Just. And so, as far as I know, we don't have evidence directly connecting Karl Marx to the Illuminati, but you can just see it's so clear the similarities between what the Illuminati was working toward and what the Marxists were later working toward. Destroy the family, destroy marriage, destroy nations, destroy religion. Mass murder is an acceptable tool to accomplish those things.
Core tenets of the Illuminati were Karl Marx's core tenets.
Absolutely. And they were Satan's core tenets. So, if you go back before the Illuminati, people say, well, when did the conspiracy start? And I guess here we should pause for a minute because the word conspiracy has become so demonized, people don't even know what it means anymore. So just, if you pick up any reasonable dictionary and look up the word conspiracy, it means 2 or more people working in secret for illegal, immoral, or nefarious intent. So there are conspiracies all over the place. Nobody's surprised when the Department of Justice charges a group of businessmen with conspiracy to fix prices or to suppress competition or whatever. But suddenly when we add politicians to the mix, we say, oh, they wouldn't conspire. I mean, that's preposterous. So conspiracies, and the Bible records many conspiracies.
By definition, the Illuminati, they were even explicitly saying we're conspiring.
Right. And they used a bizarre system where only the inner core had the true knowledge of what were the end objectives. And so people would be given more light, as they called it, more light as they moved up the ranks. And once you got to the point where they suspected, oh, well, if we tell him more, he's going to realize what we're really up to and he's not going to like it. Well, you stop where you are and then you think you know everything. And a lot of secret societies exist today that operate on those principles.
Kind of a Masonic thing, like the 33rd.
Yeah, well, you move up, and from a Christian perspective, I do think it's strange that somebody who calls himself a Christian could take an oath that they're not going to reveal what they're told. I mean, you don't know what you're going to be told yet, right? You don't know what you're going to be participating. So So I've always thought that was strange. And where exactly this started, I don't think is as relevant as the fact that if you go through the Bible, if you go all the way back to the book of Genesis, back to early on, the Tower of Babel, you have people refusing to submit to God's instructions. God said, be fruitful and multiply, you spread out over the face of the earth. They said, no, we're just going to stay here and build this tower. And that thread has run through all of human history. If you go back to the Roman Empire, there were a never-ending assortment of cults worshiping different deities. And when Rome eventually became Christian under Constantine, or at least took on Christianity as the official religion, a lot of those cults over the next 100 years or so were forced to go underground. And so they became secret societies dedicated to worshiping some pagan deity that, of course, the Apostle Paul has labeled demons. And so, was Adam Weishaupt the first conspirator to think, let's overthrow all of God's precepts and instructions for man? It's almost certainly not, but he was a very important one.
You briefly mentioned Psalm 2, and that's the image that comes to mind, is that where it says, let us they saw God's laws, submission to God, as oppression. They saw God's, the Ten Commandments were just being, as sort of shackling them. And so in Psalm 2, it says, let the kings of the earth gather together and sort of break their bonds, right? Break the shackles of God. There is that same where it seems, you mentioned the Tower of Babel, that when you have a people who want to unite, but they're not submitted to God, that God uses division to break up that sort of unholy alliance. So Marxism and the Illuminati, we have this kind of mirroring. Their core tenets, hatred of Christianity, morality, family. We treat Marx as sort of this he's politics, and we don't talk about politics in church. What was Marx trying to accomplish? Is he trying to make the world a better place, or?
That's what your college professor will tell you. And that's what your school textbook will tell you. That he believed in equality and fraternity, all those things from the French Revolution. But the reality is, Marx was, I think, consciously in league with Satan. And I think I read a lot of books about Marxism over the years. I became fascinated by Marxism, especially as somebody who really is obsessed with economics. I taught economics for 12 years. I think it's an incredibly important discipline. Marx was not an economist, and Marxism is not an economic ideology. The best you could say about that is that an economic ideology is the smokescreen to conceal what I think can be variously and accurately described as a criminal conspiracy or a diabolical conspiracy to overthrow God and his precepts and his rules and his morality. So you look at the things that Marx called for, and he was pretty transparent about what he was calling for. Get rid of private property, right? Hugely significant. Well, it was God's idea to order economic relations between human beings with private property. Very, very simple. Thou shalt not steal. Right? You can't steal something if there's no such thing as private property. So that was God's design for how human economic affairs ought to be structured. So he wanted to take that down. He wanted to dismantle the family. He believed women should be held in common and that children should be raised by the state. He believed that progressively government should tax and tax and tax, and using the currency system until nobody had any private property left. And then he wanted to get rid of nations and move us toward a one world utopia, I guess is how he would have explained it. But if you look at his poetry, and the man who did, I think, the most important work in this field was Richard Wurmbrand, a pastor who was tortured for years by communist barbarians in Romania. Ruthless torture. He wrote a book about it, Tortured for Christ, the torture that he endured. But then he did another book called Marx and Satan, where his hypothesis was that, wow, this stuff must be satanic. It's so evil, it must be satanic. And as he started doing the research, he found massive amounts of evidence, including Marx's poetry, where he talks about being in league with Satan, where he talks about his objective of overthrowing God. And then he finds evidence that a lot of the world's most prominent communist leaders were involved in Satanism and occultism and rituals. People like Vladimir Lenin, people like Chairman Mao. And I think there are lots of naive, well-meaning, useful idiots. So for whatever reason, they have rejected God, they have rejected the Bible. They're looking for something to give their life meaning. And this quest for equality and global brotherhood, et cetera, sounds appealing. But when you really boil it down, every tenet of Marxism, including the means for achieving it, which he was very openly advocating mass murder. He argued that capitalism was a critical stage on the road to socialism, and those societies that hadn't yet reached the capitalist stage, like the Scottish Highlanders, they're just irredeemable. Just get rid of them, wipe them out. So you look at all that, and I don't see how you can not see the parallels with the operations and the ideas that come from Satan.
What role then does the church, if this is a spiritual thing, well, not even economic theory, what role should the church have in educating and speaking on these issues?
That's something that I've preached on in churches across the country, and I think it's really problematic when pastors and elders in churches say, "Well, that's politics, therefore we don't talk about that." I have a friend who does the Liberty Pastor Summits, and I've taught at all of those. And he always starts off with something that has stuck with me. His name is Paul Blair, a former NFL player, actually in Oklahoma. And he always says, "What part of your life is Jesus not the Lord of?" And whatever part he's not the Lord of, that's where you got to work on, because Jesus is supposed to be the Lord of every part of your life. And there's this misconception in the modern American evangelical church that politics is something where maybe Jesus isn't the Lord of that, and maybe we don't talk about that because the Johnson Amendment, we don't want to lose our 501c3. Right. Show me scripturally. Right? The Bible talks more about government than it does about heaven, right? Obviously, God thinks government is important, and God explained to us why he instituted government. He explained to us how government should function. He explained the Christian understanding of government. And one of the reasons we're in the mess that we're in today as Americans is because the pulpits have been silent, largely, for over 5 decades on this critical thing. So if the pastors aren't teaching their congregations from the Word of God what the purpose of government is, to start with, what are the people going to conclude? Well, whatever we feel like, right? And God told us what the purpose of government is. It's to punish evil. It's to suppress evil. So government actually has a very important role to play in God's design. We know that he describes man as desperately wicked. The heart of man is desperately wicked. We are sinful. We are fallen creatures. And so some institution needs to suppress the innate sinfulness of man, or we'd have a bunch of robbing, murdering, and stealing completely out of control. Right. So government must stop those things. And if you look at Marxism, it is institutionalized sin. It's not just thou shalt not steal. It's we're going to steal everything, right? It's not just thou shalt not murder. It's, well, we're going to murder anybody who stands in our way. So on every point, the Bible addresses these questions. And if the Christians of the world, and in particular America, aren't informed about these things, it becomes very easy to mislead them. If you don't know what the purpose of government is, and your college or high school government teacher says, well, the government should give you health care, the government should educate your children, the government should redistribute your wealth, you don't have any point of reference to know whether that makes sense or not. So the church should be at the forefront of, first of all, exposing evil, second of all, teaching God's design for every institution, family, church. They never have any problem talking about family or church, but suddenly government is one institution that we can't talk about.
Starts at self-governed. Right? I should govern myself. Family government, church government, local government, federal government. So that is just, so we sort of just sweep it all in and kind of expect this federal government to do kind of all these other roles because we lost kind of self-control, family, church government. We lost the role of church, the family. So everything is now just we need this kind of big central government to do it all.
And I think that's one of the reasons why Marx was so adamant about attacking the family and the church, because those institutions were perpetuating a system where government could not expand indefinitely, right? Because
kept it in check.
Yeah, the family had a sphere, the church had a sphere, the government had its sphere, but we're now at a point where families are collapsing. The church has really lost its voice, if we want to be charitable, right? It's more of a social club now. We go there for the smoke machines and the feel-good experience more than the learning from the Word of God, how we are to think about things, how we are to act. And then that leaves the government to then pick up the pieces. And so the Bible tells us what government should be doing, and of course, by definition, then what it should not be doing. The Constitution does the same thing for the U.S. government, but your average American doesn't know what that says. And you're right. Now we have government that has intruded into areas where it never should have been in the first place. In fact, a lot of the principles of Marxism have been adopted in the United States, and at least a very significant segment of the population not just thinks that's okay, embraces that and supports that. So, and it all goes back to this ignorance that I think the church bears a large amount of responsibility for allowing that ignorance to be perpetuated.
To me, it's a brilliant diabolical plan for control, right? Take away all their money, tell them they don't need money, right? I mean, you're dependent on somebody. If you don't have any money, you're completely dependent.
Yep.
Take away that family bond, the church bond. And on that same topic of kind of what things the church, I think, should be talking about, immigration policy is almost this, it's another thing where it's like, why should the church be talking about that? This is immigration. It's just a political thing.
So the subject of immigration is something that's near and dear to my heart. Most of my life, I've lived as an immigrant in 8 different countries on 4 different continents. So I know what it's like to be an immigrant, and I appreciated being welcomed to different countries. I'm married to an immigrant. My wife is from another country. So I have no particular animus against immigrants. And I think for Americans, it's a little bit harder to understand this because we do live in a country that's very, very unique. When the Bible talks about nations, I don't think it has in mind something like the United States or the Soviet Union. It's more talking about people groups, the Zulus, the Swedes, the Hungarians, the Xhosa people, right? So these are nations. And it was God's design to divide mankind into nations. I think he doesn't explain exactly why he did this, but I think part of it we get from Genesis chapter 11, where we had tried to build this big tower, and God says, if they can do it, then there's nothing that they won't be able to do. So there's some reason why God doesn't want all of humanity working together, maybe because of our sinful ways. Who knows what kind of wickedness we'd get up to. So God divided us up into nations. And there is, and there has been for a very long time, long before Karl Marx came on the scene, this burning, passionate desire to build a one world political, economic, and even religious system. And nowadays, that's more obvious than it ever was before. And so when you look at the mass migration that we've started seeing over the last decade, and that I think is going to accelerate radically in the years to come, we need to see it through, I think, first of all, a biblical lens. Second of all, through the lens of those who want to destroy the nation, who want to abolish even the concept of nation, the division that exists between mankind. And that's not my opinion. A lot of the top people promoting these ideas have said so very openly. People like former Goldman Sachs executive Peter Sutherland, who was the UN migration czar for many years, he said in public, in an interview with the UN News Service, that we want to undermine national homogeneity. We want to get people to recognize that old shibboleths like national sovereignty, our historic memories of the past, are not coming back. So this is an effort to kind of blend all of humanity into a one world system so that they can then get a one world totalitarian political and economic system. And you see it much more clearly, I think, right now in Europe than you do in other places. But I've spent many years living in Europe. You look at, for example, a lot of the big cities of Western Europe. Brits are a minority now in their own capital city of London. Swedes are a minority in their major city of Malmo. Germans are a minority in the city of Frankfurt. Belgians are a very small minority now in their own capital city of Brussels. Something like 1 in 4 is actually Belgian. Dutch are a minority in Amsterdam. And so what happens is, and this is accelerating, right? This is going to keep accelerating. And so what happens is the children have been indoctrinated to believe this is all great. You're going to wake up one day, and you're going to say, wow, I'm completely surrounded by people who don't speak my language, who don't have the same history as me, don't have the same culture as me, don't even like me. What is this line on a map that we call a border, and why is it there? Right? Why should that line be there? Why don't we just move toward say a European superstate, like a European Union, or the final step, a one world system? So I think that's the objective. Now, they've used some very, very deceitful slogans and ideas to try to facilitate this and to try to get naive, well-meaning, and even Christian people to embrace this. One of them was compassion. We were told that it was the compassionate thing to do to open up our borders to, say, people fleeing Syria during that civil war. Well, if this was truly compassion, there's several responses to that. If this was truly compassion, first of all, we start with the fact that you could support 50 times more refugees right outside of the border of Syria, in Jordan or Lebanon or Saudi Arabia or Egypt, whatever, than you could by bringing them to the United States or bringing them to Sweden or bringing them to Germany. So if you're really a humanitarian, why would you want to only help 150th of the refugees when you could help many more over there? Second of all, who was it that destroyed these countries in the first place? Now that you might say, well, the dictator and the terrorist groups. Well, who was behind the scenes helping them in every step of the way? It doesn't matter if you look at Libya, Iraq, Syria, I mean, so many of these countries, the Ivory Coast, so many of these countries that have been destroyed in recent years have been destroyed by Western leaders acting very deliberately and very strategically. And so I look at this through an analogy. If I burn somebody's house down and then invite them into your house and tell you that you need to pay for them, you wouldn't call me a humanitarian. You'd call me a criminal. You'd call me an arsonist. I mean, that's exactly what they've done here. They just burned down a bunch of people's countries, and then they invited them into yours and said you had to pay for it, even though they have totally different cultures, totally different backgrounds, totally different religious, moral, cultural beliefs. So that's problematic. And then they switched a little bit. It was kind of a bait and switch. Then it was, well, it's economic, right? And I was living in Sweden at the height of the migration crisis involving Syria. So I saw the evolution of the narrative. Yeah. Suddenly it wasn't compassion anymore because the facts came out. And now it's economic. Swedes didn't have enough babies. And so who's going to pay for the welfare system? Who's going to, help grandma at the old people's home? She doesn't have any kids, or, she doesn't have enough kids to come help her. Who's going to help her? Well, we got to bring in all these immigrants to supposedly get jobs and pay the taxes that are going to support that. Again, total lie. You can look at the data. A friend of mine did an incredible analysis of this, actually an Iranian living in Sweden, and said we can't tell when these people might become positive contributors to the trade. They're going to cost the taxpayer money as far into the future as we can see. So it wasn't humanitarian. It was certainly not for economic reasons. What was the real reason? Well, I think there's two primary objectives. Destroy the nation as an ideal, and then de-Christianize societies that historically have been Christian. Primarily, that means Europe was the heart of Christendom for a very long time. And we're watching that happen right now. Again, I can use Sweden as an example because I've spent so many years living there. During this massive wave of immigrants coming in, and about a third of the population now is immigrants in Sweden, and that share is going to increase very, very rapidly. You had the bishop of the Church of Sweden say, hey, maybe we should take down the crosses from our churches so we don't offend the Muslims. You now have Christmas parades and Christmas markets all over Europe that have been there for centuries. They're now calling them winter markets because they don't want to offend the Muslims. The Christian ethics that were incorporated into the legal systems, well, those are now discriminatory. We're now a multicultural society. Why should we give a preference to Christian morality and these types of things? Right. So we're watching the de-Christianization of what used to be known as Christendom, and we're watching the undermining of even the concept of nation. And I think those are the two most important goals. There are other goals, the Cloward-Piven strategy of crash the welfare system to destroy capitalism. So there's other agendas at work, and I think each of the special interests involved has their own kind of short-term goal. People look at the Democrat Party, well, they want more voters, so they're bringing in foreigners who don't share our beliefs and traditions. You can look at the big companies, well, they want cheaper labor, so they can have bigger profits, so they want infinite new workers. You look at the teachers' unions. Americans are fleeing the government schools, so hey, well, let's bring in new butts to keep the funding levels the same. So each one of the special interest groups has their own reason, but when it comes to the churches, a lot of the Christian organizations that are not just supporting, but facilitating this influx, they're being paid by the federal government enormous amounts of money to do this. And of course, the UN is working on this. And the UN has said repeatedly, they have huge goals with this mass migration. The 2030 agenda is something they're very proud of. They call it the Master Plan for Humanity. Right on their website, they tell you that migrants are agents of change who are going to help us bring about our 2030 agenda. So this is much deeper than compassion or economic considerations. I believe it is diabolical, and I believe as Christians, yes, we need to have compassion for all individuals, even those who persecute us and hate us, but there's a difference between being compassionate toward our fellow human being and opening up our borders in a way that is designed to undermine nations and undermine Christianity.
It seems they're telling us there's an agenda. It's been around for a long time, and the destruction of Christianity, of nations, of family, it's still going on. It just has a different look now.
Precisely. Yep. And they've come up with different excuses on each of these fronts, right? The destruction of the family. They've got all kinds of excuses for why they implement the programs that help destroy the family. And they know if they just came out and said, hey, we want to make you all slaves and we want to destroy your country so we can have a one world totalitarian government, people would be like, no, that's okay, we'll pass, right?
Yeah.
So they I mean, you look at all the dictators of world history. None of them ever came out and said, we're going to enslave you and take all your freedom. They always said, oh, it's for the children. Oh, it's because we're so loving. It's because we have such good ideas. It's going to bring about equality or whatever.
Angel of light.
You took the words right out of my mouth. Yeah. Satan disguised himself as an angel of light. Dictators disguise themselves as people who care about you and love you when really they're after their own.
Yes, that's right.
That was part one of my incredible conversation with journalist and author Alex Newman. I hope that stirred something in you the way it did for me, because the battles we're facing today are not just political or cultural, they're spiritual at its root. And God is calling his people everywhere to wake up, to stand firm, and to take their place. If this message at all encouraged or challenged you, would you mind sharing it with others who may need to hear it as well? And if you just take a second to like it, that really does help our channel reach more people. And finally, don't forget to subscribe, because in part 2, we go even deeper. Until then, stay rooted in the Word of God, stay courageous in the Lord, and let's renew his world together.
Brought to you by thepodcastupload.com, empowering faith-driven voices.